Welcome to Making the Cut podcast with Chris Hill and Sean Winter, where we help you succeed in life and business by sharing principles and strategies that guide some of the most successful people in the world.
Welcome to another episode of the Making the Cut podcast. I'm Chris Hill with my co-host, Sean Winter. Today on the show, we have Michelle Bernstein, award-winning chef and media personality. Before diving into that conversation, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Libby salutes one-of-a-kinds like you, the entrepreneurial chefs who dare to be bold. No matter what vision you're creating, Libby has the full-spectrum tableware selection, trend knowledge, and expertise to help you bring it to life. Modern or classic, upscale or casual, urban or rustic, Libby's broad palette helps you create the perfect vibe to match any venue. Get inspired with Libby's breadth of insights-driven solutions at foodservice.libby.com. Becoming a restaurateur not only requires passion for food, but a keen business sense. Enhance your culinary training and management capabilities with Le Cordon Bleu's world-class programs. Learn all the necessary skills to successfully launch a business and become a leader in the hospitality and restaurant industry. Learn more at cordonbleu.edu/USA. And with that, Chris, I'm excited to talk with Michelle. I connected with her back in the fall of last year at the Florida Restaurant Show. She did a great demo. She's got a great personality, really fun, and really excited to dive into a little bit of her journey and find out about all the things that she's done and kind of get into the mind of Michelle Bernstein.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, for those that might not know her, she's been all over the Food Network. She has her own PBS show. Had a bunch of restaurants, won a James Beard Award, incredibly talented, like you said, great personality. So I'm looking forward to diving in. What do you say we hop in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Michelle Bernstein, thank you so much for joining us. How's it going today?
It's good. It's hot here in Miami today, really hot. So I'm trying to stay indoors as much as possible. But thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're excited to dive into you and your story and all your success so far. Maybe you could give the audience a bit of your background to what's gotten you to this point in your career so far.
Oh, goodness. Should I start at birth? Because that's kind of where it all happened. I won't go that far back. Being the daughter of a Jewish Latin family, I think if everything didn't revolve around food, it would be revolved around complaining and guilt. So thank goodness we had food to literally throw ourselves into. Good, bad, didn't matter what it was revolved around the dinner table. And so stemming, I believe, from that kind of a family, from that kind of a background, you have no other choice other than to either learn to be a very good eater or a very good cook or both. And luckily I had a mom that was, she was 4 generations Argentinian, and she somehow learned how to make the most beautiful Italian, Latin, passionate food. So I learned from her. That's how I got started. First, I became a very good eater, and later I became a pretty darn good cook. Not as good as her, I never will be. However, I fend for myself pretty well. So growing up, I was a prima ballerina. I moved to New York at the age of 17, just graduated high school, and I danced professionally. But the food drew me in New York City. And my biggest problem was that I couldn't be a starving dancer. I had to be one that relished in all the flavors that I would get from, whether it was, on the street, the lady with the wicker basket that would walk up and down the east side and buy her egg salad sandwiches that were so incredible. Whatever I was doing, I had to have a great bite of food for that day. And so, bringing that with me throughout my whole life and just adoring morsels of food and flavors and the culture and the history that went along with it, because I also would fall asleep reading Culture and Cuisine, these old history books about food. And it just kind of naturally fell in my lap without even knowing that it could. I went to college for nutrition and biochemistry. I never knew I could become a chef. I never knew that was an option for a girl like me. And years later, when I finished college, Mom said, okay, now what? And I looked at her and kind of with my eyes crossed, and I was like, I don't know. I don't want to work in a hospital. I don't think I want to teach yet. what is there for a person like me? And she says, well, there's this culinary school opening down the block called Johnson & Wales. Why don't you go, and maybe one day you can either write a book or go on TV and talk about healthy food. And I started. I walked in. I had butterflies like I hadn't had since ballet. And I was so excited, and I started to learn, and I realized that I was worst one in the class. Everybody that went to Johnson & Wales in the early 90s, when they had just opened here in Miami, was already a seasoned chef. They were just looking for a diploma to obviously move on in their career, further enhancing it. And I just wanted to learn how to cook, but I was a little late. So realizing I was the worst in the class, and, coming from my ballet background, which was very disciplined and had to be the best, I decided, okay, I'm going to jump into actual work. Even though I don't want to be a chef, I want to be better than anybody in my class, because that's just how I was. And so I got a job in the mornings with a food writer, Stephen Reichlin, who's very well known now for his barbecue books and his incredible history-filled books. And I got a job at night in a restaurant called Jando's and then Mark's Place, which Mark Militello, another great one from Miami. And well, he's not from here, but he was here at the time. And then I would go to school in between. And, it wasn't much of a life, but within 6 months, I was chopping faster than anybody else, and I could break down a chicken in literally 90 seconds flat. So, that's what I wanted. I just wanted to be good. And moving on a couple of years into it, I was still working the line, still cooking, and everybody would look at me and say, okay, so now what? You're not going to be a chef. You're not made for being a chef. You're too delicate. You're too little. You're too this. You're too that. You're too girly. And I would say, don't worry, guys. I'm still just learning. I'm still trying to figure it all out. 4 years later, when I would still get a lot of, smack from the boys and kind of be put down and what are you doing here? You're not chef material. All of a sudden, I turned around and I said, you know what? Why not? Why not be a chef? Why not show all of you that I can kick your measly butts and one day make something of myself? I think I actually love this, and I love how mean you all are, and I love how, masochistic this job is, and this is where I want to live. And so I made that cognizant decision, 4 years into it, not really realizing how my skills had, gotten better, not to chef level yet, but definitely gotten better, and that was it. So I kept my head down, and I just kept moving, and one day got offered a job, and I took it.
That's incredible. You said something, Michelle, in that last part. You said you made that decision. I'm such a firm believer that before someone can experience any type of success, they have to make that decision and essentially choose it, be committed to it. Can you just dive in for a moment? After you did that, how impactful was it that you consciously said, yes, this is the direction, and how critical was that for you to achieve the success even up to this day?
It was huge. It was everything I needed. You know how some people write down notes and put them in their wallet of what they want in their future, and 10 years later, it came true. That was kind of where it was for me. So I made the cognizant decision. I, realized that I'd been working in the same restaurant all these years, which was wonderful. I'd learned so much, but that I had to move on if I really wanted this. And that's where I started getting the knowledge that the tools that I used later on. So I moved to New York. I worked at one of the better restaurants in New York City. I spent my 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning rolling bread at Amy's Bread. I would save up my money and go and eat at the better restaurants for lunch because I couldn't do it for dinner because I was working. And I had no friends other than the boys in the kitchen, and the only thing I worked on were honing my skills, so that when I, wherever it was I was going to end up, I was going to be the best chef I could be. And not so much for people around me, but for me, to really feel like I knew what I was doing. And so from there, I went to Europe. I worked in France. I went to Asia. I worked there, and obviously not for money. Wherever I worked, I just would ask and really bad French or whatever language I was speaking in at the time, almost not to be understood, that all I wanted to do was work for food. Like if I got a meal out of it, which I couldn't afford, that's how I was going to stay and learn. And I'd live in these hostels all over the world. And I was on my own and I was really young. And, but I knew, at least I had a vision of what I wanted to be one day. And it were all the chefs that I looked up to. And I knew how much, they had just really busted their butts to learn as much as they could. And, I'm sure they were made fun of like I was. And I'm sure that they were, abused physically like I was and mentally like I was. And that's what I needed. I think I needed to be broken down. And I knew that, to be then brought up, as we all do in kitchens. You have to break a person down to then kind of bring them up and give them the knowledge and give them the talent and give them everything that they deserve to be taught so that they can feel confident about themselves. And if that's not done, I don't think that you're ready to be a chef. And that was definitely done to me. There was a lot more breaking down than bringing up, I have to say, but whatever it was great. And it kind of taught me a little more of who I was and the importance of discipline and the importance of really knowing what you want to do and setting a goal and just going for it, without abandon. I mean, just truly setting yourself for success.
Speaking of kind of finding out who you are, you said you worked for Steve Reichlin, big barbecue guy for those that aren't familiar with him. Also, working in Asia, France, New York. It sounds like at some point you decided you wanted to, quote unquote, come home, maybe back to Miami, but also to maybe your roots with your mom being, Argentinian. What was that process like for you? Obviously, I'm sure you found a lot of yourself in traveling, but then coming back home to the culture that was important to you food-wise.
Well, it's interesting. I came home, I think, because for me, wherever my parents are and were at the time was my home. And, I'm still a sweet Jewish girl at heart. So I wanted to be near them first and foremost. And I wanted to come back. And I think I was a little egocentric at the time because I really wanted to show off all the skills that I had learned. Meanwhile, I didn't realize that I was nowhere near where I could and should have been at the time. But I came very proud. I came back from Europe really proud and wanting to kind of just take Miami by storm. So I got my first position, and I think I was only like 24, 25 years old. And I probably shouldn't have taken a chef position yet, looking back. I think I probably should have been a sous chef for a couple of years longer. But I did. I took this job, and I was a chef of a restaurant. And, I just thought that what I was doing was, like nothing in Miami had ever seen before. I was so incredibly ignorant. And I just laugh at myself from back then. And I was making, bouillabaisse to order. And, I was rolling up pieces of fish, pretending that they were sole and poaching them to look like Medusa. It was, very early 90s stuff. And we were doing like 400 covers a night. I was literally getting destroyed, like absolutely destroyed every single night. But, I was taught the right way to do things, and that's the way I was going to do them. And, I wasn't going to have Bain Marie's of sauces sitting on the line, ready to like sauce my fish and my seafood. It was made to order until like, a month later, we're doing 450 covers and, the tickets are coming up and they're falling on the ground. There's so, you remember those days where you would have nightmares about being in the weeds and the tickets would be all over the ground. You'd be stepping on tickets and you couldn't keep up. Well, that's what my life was. And it was a big revelation for me. And I realized that I wasn't good enough and I wasn't ready. And I needed to work for other people for longer. And obviously I was in the wrong place for the kind of food I was doing. So I either had to go backwards and change the way that I cooked and make it, for these hundreds of people that would come in every night, and make it as good as I could and as well as I could, and just change my ways. And so I did. And I would run back to the people that taught me and would ask them, what am I doing wrong? How do I fix this? I want to excel. I want to do well, but, I can't make things to order. And I didn't know how to shoe make. I had no idea. I had worked for some of the best chefs in this country and out of the country. I had no idea how to work in a busy restaurant. No clue. I'd never done it. And so, all my mentors would kind of point me in the direction of restaurants that did it well, that would be busy, but did busy well. So I did that, and I went to busy restaurants, and I would be allowed to come into kitchens and, be allowed to see how things really ran in restaurants that did, big numbers, just big grossing restaurants. And I realized that my whole world was kind of wrong the way that I was doing things. Don't get me wrong. It's good to know and good to learn the techniques and good to have them in your back pocket. And it's a wonderful thing. But to me, you can't get to where you need to be as far as, being a really good shoemaker or maybe not a shoemaker, just maybe learning how to put it out, in a fast, efficient way, unless you have those tools. But I definitely had to work on it. And I did. And I ended up doing 450 covers months later, but then realizing that it just wasn't for me. So I guess I got, kicked in the butt the right way and realized that I really didn't know as much as I thought I did. And I might have known how to make a great foie gras terrine, but learning how to run a restaurant successfully, as a lot of people think that being a chef just means that I can cook on a line, which is kind of ridiculous because, chef's a manager, chef's a psychologist, a chef is an adult, a mature person that knows how to run a restaurant with a group of people, that work front and the back, doing it successfully, keeping everybody abreast of what's going on, keeping lines of communication open, and doing it, in a way that keeps everybody not happy, but kind of afloat, and I was too immature. I had no idea what I was doing. So I worked in the sous chef in places for a little while longer, and then a couple years later, I finally took another chef job, but where I was competent and I was mature and I was an adult. And at that point, I could figure out how to put out 300-400 covers, but do it well. And don't get me wrong, I would do it from 7 a.m. I was the only person that I would allow to make all the stocks and reductions until, service started. And that's where my staff, more of them would come in and we would bust it out. But after working like that for 3 years, I burnt myself out and I had to go back to kitchens that were a little more, normal. I took a job at the Mandarin Oriental as their chef, and I realized that you could actually have not a life, but a vision of a life. And that's where I actually met my husband, when I finally let my hair down a little more in that restaurant at Azul. And I was able to meet the man of my life and, find that I could actually have a future and have a little piece of happiness in my own personal life, as well as my happiness and confidence being a chef.
So many incredible lessons there. And, there's something that stood out to me. You said that you felt you weren't good enough. You weren't ready at some point. You got your butt kicked. And I think there's such a parallel to a life lesson there too, for people that maybe if they are going through a tough time, there's a lesson that the either whatever you believe in, universe, faith, whatever's going in, there's a lesson that you should be learning at this point, and it's not a period of time to push it away or push blame, but it's a time for you to ask questions like you did. Go to your mentors, ask questions, understand what's the lesson I need to learn, and that's what I got out of that last piece of your story that you did brilliantly.
Well, what I realized, that it's never too late to take a couple steps backward and really look and see what and I felt that I was swimming in, and learn from that and learn, okay, I might not have the tools to get myself out of this, but I know that I can find someone to help me, or a few people to help me do this together. And that's when I realized that it takes a village. It takes You can't do anything on your own, which I really thought I was out there by myself. I thought that I was out there to be a chef on my own, do it myself, keep my head down, didn't have to talk to people, didn't have to communicate, didn't have to ask for help. Because that's the last thing a woman wanted to do in a kitchen was ask for help. Because my first few years, if I asked for the boys to help me lift the heavy stuff, I was put down. And I was told by my first sous chef all those years ago, when I was just a kid, I was told, Michelle, start going to the gym. You got to lift some weights. You got to show these boys that you can handle it. You can't ask for help, and that stuck with me, that, just show that you're tough and you can just stick it out and you can make it work. In a way, it was very good advice because it definitely helped me physically. But in a way, it made me afraid to ask for things. And we can't do it alone. You can't work in this career or any of them or life itself. You can't do it by yourself. It's not possible. No matter how shy you are, which, by the way, I'm terribly shy, and I hated to ask anybody for anything. But I finally did, and God, it made me so much better.
Now, you opened your first restaurant at a fairly young age. What was that like, and are there things you maybe would have done different looking back?
Oh, God, I would have done everything differently. But yes, so I met my husband, like I told you, at the Mandarin Oriental, and we were working there for years together, and finally it was like, okay, is it time? Are we ready? And he's a couple years younger than I am, so we were terrified, but we were tired of working for the corporations and not having anything that was really ours, Plus, I was starting to do more television, and every time I got an opportunity to do, whether it was branding or spokesperson opportunities or more TV, it was something that I had to go through corporate to see if they would approve it, to see if it was good enough for their brand. So I think I was kind of ready to make my own brand. I was afraid, don't get me wrong, if an oven broke, I would call maintenance and they would come and fix it. If anything would happen, it wouldn't be on me. And that was the part that scared me the most, was, having to be responsible for literally everything, from people's health to the health of the establishment, to the publicity, whatever it was, it's on you. So I love when I hear these young people saying, oh, I'm going to open a restaurant next year. And I tell them, well, that's wonderful, and you should hold on to that dream, but come and let me show you what that dream is really like. Let me show you a little piece of reality of what owning your own business really is. And if you have a lot of partners and investors and, and a backbone, that's wonderful. But we literally went out and just did this. We got married, we bought our house, and we opened a restaurant within the same month. It was absolutely dreadful. And talk about, just being the most stressed out of your life. So we came to a neighborhood that I was very familiar with. I grew up in it. It's very, let's just say, urban. And there were a lot of clear heels. And it was up and coming in the near future. But we got this little space in a strip mall, and I love when people, talk down about restaurants and strip malls. But in Miami, it's not like you can go out and buy a building. Things are really expensive here. And so we just went into this space. My sister came in and helped me design it. I made it kind of like a Barbie house from growing up, a Barbie house that she and I used to make under my parents' table, a dining room table. And that's kind of like what got us going on the design. And it was a disaster. We got this flea market Mexican upholstery to cover the chairs. And, we did what we could. And we didn't tell anyone that we were opening this restaurant. We didn't think that we were ready. And we definitely were not. And the second we opened the doors, such an accomplishment to just get people there for us. And luckily I had a great staff of people that I knew and trusted and had with me for a while, from, years before. I kind of, collected people. We all collect each other, don't we, along the way. And we opened it together. And luckily we opened it, financially speaking, it wasn't the best idea, but I opened it a little heavy on the employment side. We had incredible people in the front and the back, and I had support. But, months later, turns out I was spending way too much because I had too much talent in the kitchen. So, little by little, we found everybody a job somewhere else, those that I couldn't afford. And I kept a core group with me, and it was great. Everything was incredible until John Mariani, I probably shouldn't mention him, who came to Azul when I was there and chose it as one of the best restaurants in the country, came in for dinner. And I came to the table. I was so excited. I had come up with this great menu, and he sits down, he looks at me, he's like, "What have you done to your career?"
Wow.
And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "This is dreadful. How could you open a restaurant in this neighborhood, this little puny, little tiny place, a little bit tacky?" He's like, "I'm sure the food is great, but I can't believe you would have done this to yourself." So that was hard. I've always taken hits, but that was pretty bad. So, it was, I got that a lot. I had people that used to be, constant visitors of Azul at the Mandarin come in and say, "We came here once, but nothing is good enough to bring us back to this neighborhood, to this, have to park in the back near an alley, walk through the back of a restaurant to get to space without great alcohol, because we only had a wine and beer license because we didn't have the $180,000 to spend on a liquor license." So it was tough. My husband and I really, we thought, well, what have we done? What have we done? So we dig our heels in, and I just started creating the best food I could. We got more creative. We did some funky stuff. We did some cool dinners. We did everything we could within ourselves to come up with something great and worthwhile to come into, I guess, that what most people consider to be a really bad neighborhood, with really funky design. But we made it happen, and we made it right for 12 years, and it was a great run, and we loved every minute of it. And the best part was that we were always together, and we made our extended family out of everybody that came and worked there. And Zachary, our son, was born while we had that restaurant, and it just became part of our family. But then there's always a time where you say, okay, is it done? Have we had our run, and is it enough? And it was. By 12 years, I was tired of working every night. I wanted to be with my son more. We had opened and closed at least 5 other restaurants one in Mexico that was hit by the hurricane, one in the design district that was hugely popular called Senora Martinez, which, by the way, Mariani came back and did vote us one of the best restaurants in the country for, because he liked the design and the space and the area. We had opened in a hotel in Miami Beach, which we didn't know was for sale. When we opened the restaurant, the hotel was for sale. We've had a lot of bad luck. And someone came in and bought the building where we had Mishi's and tripled our rent. And that was when we were like, you know what? We had a great run, and we're done. And so it's amazing how life kind of serves you up what you don't expect to be eating, but in turn it kind of makes you stronger and takes you to a place where you never thought you would be, but takes you to a place maybe you should be. So to this day, and I don't mean to move so far forward, but now I own one cafe that serves as my kitchen for my catering. We're the official caterer of Art Basel, the biggest event that comes to Miami every year, and we do a lot of other stuff throughout, from events from 2 to 2,000. I get to be the chef of Macy's, the chef of Lexus. I'm I partner up with American Express to do the Centurion Lounge. I have like 10 jobs still, and I have 2 TV shows, and now I'm hosting TV shows for another channel, which is lovely. And I get to do all this, but I get to cook at home for my family. And it's amazing the road that I've taken and to get here where I am now, which I never thought, looking back 20 years ago, that I wouldn't be at a restaurant, working every night where I was the happiest. But I now can take care of my family. I can feed them really delicious food. My son is so spoiled. And food-wise, and keep going and keep changing. And I'm looking at 3 contracts now for a possible restaurant and a possible partnership. And it's great. I have time to do other things now and use the other side of my brain and be a mom and a wife and have a little bit of time off every once in a while. It's kind of cool.
It's an incredible journey. And I do want to take it back because there's something that really stood out to me. There is something called the internal and external locus of control. And for you, after you got that, after John kind of, I will say, blasted your first place and people came in and you had this bad reception, you said that you just dug your heels in and you started just controlling what you could control, it sounds like, and you just got internal instead of being external and thinking everyone was against you. You just controlled what you can control. And I think that probably that in and of itself, you doing that is what drove that success for that next decade. Am I right?
Oh, totally. Totally. And we made such a happy place internally that, what's really funny is that the streets now have mothers with baby strollers walking down the street and retail stores opening and restaurants everywhere. And we were the first ones there. And it's incredible how you can gentrify a neighborhood with just one restaurant. And we truly did. And we never even thought about that. We just went, we did our daily lives. We worked hard. We loved what we had going in that restaurant, and we put so much heart into it that it became a wonderful place and a place where we saw people get engaged, get married, have children. We'd even cater their bar mitzvahs now. It's an amazing thing to kind of grow up and see people growing up in a restaurant. It's a really beautiful thing. And we just made it our happy place inside of those 4 walls.
That's great. So one thing, what would you say is your advice for those individuals that feel that they're ready to step out on their own right now for the first time? What's your advice for them in looking back over some of the things that you've done, maybe mistakes and lessons that you've learned?
One thing I would say is first learn about business, because it's the last thing I ever thought of. I thought just being a great chef or a great cook and a pretty good chef was enough to run a business and run it well. When, to be honest with you, the last thing you need to be is a good cook when you run a business. I mean, don't get me wrong. The food has to be great. Everything has to run, like a well-oiled machine in a restaurant, in a kitchen. But if you don't know how to run a business properly, the rest doesn't really matter. So if I could have gone back to school in all that to study business so that I had that in my pocket when I opened my first one, I think that I would be stronger and could have had a bit, don't get me wrong, it was great, we did well, but it would have been a lot more of a viable business. So I'd say, first of all, learn about business, talk to business people, get as much fuel, get as much information as you can before that happens. Also, I would really decide if that's what you wanted to do, because the last thing that you do is actually cook if you're a chef in your own business. You're on the floor, with some kind of a tool in your hand trying to fix the reach-in refrigerator. You're, outside spraying to make sure no insects come inside the restaurant. You're organizing, you're shopping, you're trying to get the best deals, you're trying to scream at your purveyors to get you better fish. Whatever it is you do, it's to better the business. But the last thing you get to do is show your creativity. And don't get me wrong, I know it's there, but It's surrounded by so much stuff, so much crap that you have to deal with. It's unbelievable. So knowing all of that, you really have to make that truly cognizant decision if this is what you really want. Because on everybody else's dime, you can have fun, you can create, you can do all that great stuff that you love to do as a business person. But then when you own it, things truly change. Everything changes.
I couldn't agree more. In terms of marketing, advertising, branding, opening the doors that first day, you said you had a line out the door of 100. It sounds like that might have been somewhat surprising, or maybe it wasn't. What
it was. That was back then. It was word of mouth, and I know what I can tell what your question is going to be. So things are a lot different from the way that they were. If you're not good at social media these days, you're done. Last year, my agent, my manager told me, I'm going to fire you if you don't get on social media, because this is why you've been hired, in all these different facets, is because, you're good behind the camera, you're very natural, but if you don't get in with the social media thing, you're done. So I would say first and foremost, get really friendly with your phone. As much as we hate it, although the younger generation doesn't, they're kind of born with it in their hand. Just get really good at it, because if you don't have a huge following on Twitter or Instagram, you actually will not be first for the job, sadly, in a lot of different stuff, a lot of different aspects. So I would say that is first and foremost a big one. The other one for me that's always worked for me since I was younger is that I'm not too good to say no to anything. In other words, there'll be a huge dinner, attracting a lot of press, and somebody maybe got sick or couldn't make it, so I'm their number 2 choice, which, chefs have big egos, so a lot of times, hey, you didn't call me from the beginning, so no, I'm not doing it. I would never say that. To me, if they thought of me second, third, or fourth, or fifth, or 10th, I'm happy to do it, and I'm happy to step in, and I always have. And so I have always been that person that's more reliable, and so I feel like I became a first choice out of my reliability from my past. And don't ever think you're too good for anything, because you're not. Because I hate to say, a couple years later, there's always somebody younger, cuter, and more talented around the corner. So if they like you and you're reliable and you're good and you're a hard worker and everybody knows it, you're going to get more work.
Absolutely. And I want to touch back on, you said that social media, and you said if you don't have that following, you're not going to be the first to get the job. And I think, were you speaking a little bit more of where you're at in terms of some of those entrepreneurial type opportunities that are out there, brand collaborations, things of that nature?
Yes, that, because I'm living it. But I see it with everything. I see it with people that are trying to start up their own businesses and try to do the whole GoFundMe thing and, other ways of raising money. The only way to do it is by having a heavy amount of flow with your social media handles. And I see it with a lot of different things. If you're not out there, you'll never be able to raise the funding, raise the money, and get what you're setting out to get, or achieve.
Agreed. And so people understand influencer marketing, this whole subset of marketing, there's just such a huge opportunity for anyone that does take that social media seriously and build up their own kind of either personal brand, let alone business brand. Companies these days are spending more and more and more to collaborate with people, especially chefs or, food entrepreneurs, if you will. They're spending more and more on this. So it's super important to take that stuff seriously, like you said.
But do it well and do it right. Because some people do it a little more tastefully than others. I mean, I'm an old girl, so I'm a little classic. But it will depict who you are. It truly will. So just remember that when you're doing it.
Absolutely. Now, let me ask you this, changing gears. How do you balance everything, right? Is there any routines that you follow, productivity things that you do to ensure that you're staying on top of everything? Because it sounds like you've got a pretty busy schedule and you're managing family life at the same time.
It's funny, I feel like in the last 6 months of my life, I'm finally kind of figuring it out. Now, once you say that you got it all under control and that you've balanced, something happens, right? So I'm not going to say that out loud. There's no way I'm saying that out loud right now. However, I found that the earlier I get started in the day, and I know this is very simple, the earlier I get started in the day, the more I take care of myself, which is something I didn't realize was a thing until just about 2 years ago when I was very ill, and I nearly lost my life due to a piece of sushi and a parasite. But from that moment, I realized that if I don't take care of me, I don't take care of my son properly, my husband, my father, who I help take care of, my extended family around me, or business. So you have to come first. So if you don't energize yourself, exercise, do something good for yourself, eat well, start your day off right, then nothing else will. So now my son and I wake up a little bit earlier in the day. We get ourselves moving. I feed him and he's young. He's only 6.5. We get fed. I fill his lunchbox with way too good of a carbonara, and then I take him to school. I drop off. I come back home. Then my husband and I have time together to talk about everything that we have going on, business opportunities. We really kind of set out what we need to do. Then I have the rest of the staff sometimes comes over the house and I make everybody lunch, or we do it at the cafe at Crumb. But there's always food involved, and then we set out what we need to do and we try to bust it all out, or I go and I film for a few hours and get my filming done. But there's always a lot of phone calls in between, a lot of stops at supermarkets to make sure that the house is always filled with good stuff. It's interesting. I always feel like as long as my family comes first, and as long as I'm doing the things I need to do in the way I need to do them, as long as I dot my I's and I cross my T's properly, then everything else will just figure out its way. I put a lot of attention into things when I need to do them. But if I don't get things done one at a time, nothing will ever get done. And I've taught that to my husband as well. Just when he gets overwhelmed, when we have a lot of things going on, it's like, okay, let's tackle one by one, and we do, and we either do it together or he does it on his own, but it just feels better, and it feels so good to cross things off a list. I get so excited when, okay, let's just do it until it's done, until we've done it as well as we could, until we finished it. And if it's ever hanging in my head, I can never get a full night's sleep. So I'm the type of person I have to tackle everything with all I've got until it's really, I've done everything I could do, and then I cross it off, and then I move on.
I think that's huge. In this industry, it's so easy. A lot of times people can have a list and say, oh gosh, I have to fix the walk-in cooler, I have to write this schedule up, I have to do inventory, scheduling, all this kind of stuff. But being intentional and saying, all right, this is my list of things to do that I need to get done today, order of importance, and knocking them out as you go. I think that's huge. Yeah,
you got to stay organized. It's funny. It was such a big thing for me. Like even with ordering in a restaurant, something so simple. I literally have on everybody's computer a typed out list of produce, meats, dairies, seafood, non-perishables, a list of everything we sell at the restaurant, and all the purveyors and all their numbers and the salespeople and the specs on everything, and that's our order forms, and I'm in charge of it. Even at this point, I just I have to give them the tools so that they can succeed, and that's just how it is. Something as small as that. It's so important to try to maintain as organized as possible, which is funny. I'm sitting right now in an unmade bed, and I'm looking around in my room thinking, Jesus, there's so much to do here. But, like I said, it starts out at home, and then I move on.
Speaking of home, I'm currently in the process of organizing a wedding. Now, Sean's been helpful with me in keeping my sanity. He has the analogy of organizing things. Someone's a pilot, someone's a co-pilot. If you're the pilot, you're the one in charge of a certain project. I know you and your husband are in business together. It sounds like you met in the industry. How have y'all managed to keep your sanity, your love, all that kind of stuff in such a challenging industry that can be a minefield for relationships?
Oh, big time. And, I'm not going to say that it's always been perfect, because it definitely hasn't. But what we do, which has kept our 18 years extremely strong, and to me, probably better than ever, is that we respect each other's ground. He doesn't try to cross and tell me how to do what I do, and I never try to jump in and tell him what to do. Earlier on, it was hard because, let's face it, I was getting a lot of PR. I did a lot of TV, and we would walk into events and stuff, and he would kind of stand behind me, even though he's a really strong, big guy, and people love him. But I realized that, I've never been called Michelle Martinez. I've always been called Michelle Bernstein, even though I'm married to David Martinez. And for a little while, it was really hard, but I think he found his own as well. He owns a very successful bar with a couple of guys called Sweet Liberty. They just won one of the best new bars in the world. And that has really given him a sense of accomplishment. We all need our senses of accomplishment, right? And I feel like I was the one that won the beard. I was the one that won the, breaking the glass ceiling. I was the one that was getting all this recognition. And poor David was my partner, doing 50% of everything, but not getting any accolades. And so when we found the opportunities to give him his own direction and his own, entrepreneur possibilities, we did. And, it's been great because he has found his own identity. What's scary is when you get lost and you lose your identity within someone else, and that is hugely possible. But I always made sure that he did have his own identity, and that everybody knew that, he was running the front of the house. If anybody would ask me anything, or people would come to me, hey, tell us about this wine, or, tell us about this or that, I would say, no, you talk to my husband. This is what he does. He runs the restaurant. And I always made sure that he had his identity and his strength, where he had it and I had mine. And I kept my place, because not saying that I'm a woman that needs to stay in her place, but I knew that I had my strengths and that he has and had his, and they were very separate, and we kept them that way. And it's always worked for us throughout the years, and I've given him a lot of respect in what he does, and I've never, tried to come anything or anywhere close to what he can do. And we just stand our ground,
I love that. It's invaluable advice, life, business, relationships, partnerships, all of that. You better believe I took notes on that one too, as I'm only 2.5 years in on my marriage. So
if you don't respect each other with everything, our parenting styles at the beginning were so different as well. And we were fighting for the first time in so many years. We were actually fighting about how we parented. And that's, first of all, you can't show your child that you're weak, and that you're having, kind of negative feelings about how another person is parenting you. It's the worst thing in the world. And so we, just like I've gone to get help in other ways, we went and took a class on parenting, and now we're totally on the same page, which kills our son. He hates it, but, we back each other up in everything. I would fight to the death for my husband, and he would do the same for me. And we've always tried to maintain that level of an even field on every level. Of course, I cook a lot better than he can, but he can shake a drink and mix a cocktail a hell of a lot better than I can, and choose wine and all that good stuff, and it's just wonderful. And where would you be at a dinner table without a great glass of wine, if you were sitting and facing, a beautiful roast pigeon? So, it all goes hand in hand, and it has to be very respectful and very even.
Love that. Last one for me as we're wrapping up, but where do you find your inspiration?
Everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Every book I open, every city I travel to, every new restaurant I taste, every feeling I might have. To me, eating and cooking is very emotional, and it comes with moods and with cravings. And so whether it's, sitting on a milk crate in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, drinking hot goat's milk and eating fish curry at 2 a.m, or, sitting at a fancy restaurant in Paris that was so hard to get into, not as meaningful maybe as the Malaysian, sitting on a milk crate, but obviously much more perfect as far as cuisine goes, or sitting on a farm, picking strawberries like I did last month with my son and trying to figure out what we were going to make out of everything that we had picked that day. It's all inspiring. Life is inspiring to me, and I keep my eyes very open. I try not to miss anything.
Final thoughts, anything you'd like to leave some of the young culinarians with, entrepreneurs with, as they're trying to figure things out, maybe from when you were 20 years old to where you are now, and what you've kind of learned along the way?
I would say learn from every experience that you have, good and bad. Learn from those that came before you. Write as much information down. That's one thing I wish I would have done. I wish I would have written more recipes and more great information down, advice. Try to keep all of it with you at all times. Remember where you come from. Remember how hard you worked to get there. Try to keep your head down and be disciplined and soak it all up, because you only get one chance.
Love it. Michelle, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Thank you for making the time for me. I really appreciate it.
So that was our conversation with Michelle Bernstein. Sean, what were your takeaways?
Man, there was a lot in there. A lot of things that I didn't get out of just reading about her. I think one of the things was early on her making that decision that she wanted to go in a particular direction, and then success started to follow her once she committed to it. And I would say she committed to it in an obsessive type way. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but in a good way. She was just obsessed about being very good at the role that she chose to do. So I thought that was really neat. Also, after she had a bad reception when she stepped out on her own, I think her really digging in her heels, her and her husband, partner, and controlling what they can control. I think that's just such an invaluable life lesson for anyone, right? That's going through a tough time. It's so easy to look outward and blame other people or circumstances when you just have to look inside and just ask yourself, what can you control? And then that's all you have to focus on. Just what can you control? That's that internal locus of control. So I love those two areas. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. For me, one thing I could really relate to was hearing her talk about, starting the restaurant, and you're trying to do everything yourself. And especially her being a female chef, I can definitely see how, if she asked for too much help, that could be a sign of weakness for certain people. But being willing to ask for help and surround yourself with good people is integral in any industry and in any successful life. So I think that really resonates with me. And I think for anyone listening, it's super important, whether you're starting your own company or if you're in a relationship with somebody, knowing you can't do it all yourself is massively important. Y'all let us know what you think of the conversation, what you took away. We had a great time chatting with Michelle. And finally, here's a quick quote from our conversation with Michelle. It's never too late to take a few steps backwards. And with that, we're signing off.